I will hand it over to our executive director and lead attorney, Joe Salazar, now, who will explain the legal action that we're taking and next steps. And then you'll hear from some of the Longmont residents that are involved, and Representative Singer will talk some about the air quality and science to support this motion. So thank you again for being here, and we'll have time for questions after the speakers have wrapped up with their statements.
Okay, where do you want me to stand? This is here?
You want to come here? There's your-
Cameras, where you guys? Right here?
Yeah, that's good, Joe.
you. Okay.
So walk us through what's happening today.
Okay, well, just didn't know if you caught the glare off my forehead or not, you know. So good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank, I want to thank our Longmont, the Sierra Club, Earthworks, and the city of Longmont for leading the effort these past numerous years on Article 16, which is a Longmont's ban against fracking within the city of Longmont. And as we know, the Supreme Court issued a decision back in 2017 that affirmed the trial court's decision to enjoin the city of Longmont from enforcing the ban. Now, what we're talking about is Article 16, which was question 300. It was a voter-approved measure, so it stays in the charter. And it's been in there even though the Supreme Court affirmed the injunction. And so right now, as it currently stands, the trial court still enjoins the city of Longmont from enforcing the ban. And the trial court made a very curious statement when issuing the injunction. It said that it was going to enjoin the city of Longmont from enforcing the ban until there was some type of policy change. And that policy change has happened. Senate Bill 19-181 is that policy change. Let's recall that in Senate Bill 19-181, it states specifically that nowhere in the section does it prohibit local governments from adopting stricter or more protective regulations against the oil and gas industry. There's nothing in Senate Bill 181 that says that it prohibits local governments from banning oil and gas activities within their borders. It doesn't say that at all. It says that there is no prohibition on local government to adopt stricter or more protective regulations. So because of that change, we have filed, as of this morning, we have filed a motion to reopen the case and to ask that the court, upon reopening the case, to ask that the court lift the injunction so that way the city of Longmont can finally enforce the voter-approved charter amendment. And so that's it for right now. I'm going to turn it over to my friend Michael Belmont, who is part of our Longmont and who helped also head up the effort on question 300. Oh, I don't know.
You could just stand close to him.
Oh, come on, Joe. Come on. You know, so like this.
That's fine.
Okay. So, hey, I think it's fitting. We have a sunny day. We're promised 300 sunny days in Colorado, aren't we? A year. Question 300 was our initiative, which passed overwhelmingly. I'll share more about that with you now. So, I'm going to start with two words and a preposition: health and safety. That message and that goal created the initiative that we took in Longmont in 2012 to ban fracking from the city limits. Why did we do that? We all knew, even then, that and recognized that fracking as a heavy industrial operation posed threats to human life and the environment. And that's if everything goes perfectly well. Shall we talk about the 4,523 spills that have happened since 2012 through the first quarter of this year, second quarter of this year? That's almost 2 a day. And that's just spills, not even mentioning the air quality affected. Who of you would not make every effort to protect your spouses, your children, your grandchildren, your parents, your neighbors, your friends, from an immediate and a very real threat? In 2012, there may have been room for debate about whether fracking posed a threat to human health and to the environment. No longer. The jury is in. folks, the jury is in. There are now over 1,700 scientific peer-reviewed studies about fracking, most of which indicate harm and potential harms from the activity. The compendium of science, medical, and media findings demonstrating risks and harms of fracking, co-published by Physicians for Social Responsibility and Concerned Health Professionals of New York, is veritably an encyclopedia of over 1,500 studies that cover studies on public health, water contamination, air pollution, engineering problems, and many more. 84% of the many studies therein which cover the effects on human health indicate harm and potential harm. That volume in its earliest edition was used by the New York Department of Public Health to recommend fracking be banned in the state of New York, which in fact it was. We now, well, I should say, we in Longmont have our own compendium of sorts of history. One being, there is of the wells in Longmont, one is proximate to a middle school that actually leaked benzene into the groundwater over 100 times the acceptable, if there's any such thing, level of deadly benzene, which was unmitigated for a year or more. We're the dubious recipients of the American Lung Association's poor rating on air quality, largely because of ozone, which is largely, if at least 55% is contributed by the oil and gas industry. And so why did the Supreme Court then, with all of this, deny our ban in 2016 and shoot it down? Well, and by the way, it passed in an overwhelming way, completely bipartisan. So it was because our ban conflicted with the state's priority to foster, aka promote, the oil and gas development wherever and whenever they wanted to, without due consideration for impacts on public health. Now, from those Supreme Court readings, Mr. Salazar made reference. I just want to read this because it's really important. Quote, interveners, i.e. Longmont citizens, are essentially asking this court to establish a public policy that favors protection from health, safety, and environmental risks over the development of mineral resource. Whether public policy should be changed in that manner is a question for the legislative or a different court. Well, the legislative answered that question in SB 181. That oil and gas must be developed, quote, in a manner that protects public health, safety, and welfare, end quote. Even for our own Colorado Bill of Rights, Section 3, it says all persons have certain inalienable rights, among which is seeking and obtaining safety, end quote. Folks, we deserve health and safety. We voted for it overwhelmingly in Longmont, and we deserve our vote and our voices to be honored. And so I leave you with the same two words and one preposition with which I started: health and safety. God knows there is little in this life of greater value.
Thank you. Next, we're gonna have Karen Dyke. She's gonna speak. She's also a Longmont resident. She also was part of our Longmont. So please go ahead. And I'll stand next to you.
Oh, okay. Thank you all for coming today. When I retired in 2013 and moved to Longmont, I thought my new city was protected from the ravages of fracking. What an education I have received since then. As a retired registered nurse, I began to learn about the increased risks from nearby fracking sites from the air pollution. I saw lab tests of people who had benzene and other pollutants in their blood and urine. I used to work in ICUs. I had no idea you could even test for these contaminants. I also learned about dismaying health studies those that show fetal defects, cancer, increased hospitalizations for pneumonia, and respiratory issues like sinusitis and asthma. I read about how children are especially vulnerable to the pollutants because of their small bodies and because they tend to be outside playing. Playing outside should not be a bad thing. However, the risk of certain childhood leukemia is higher when you live closer to wells. A study by Johns Hopkins University shows that those who live near to wells are up to 4 times more apt to have asthma attacks. A year ago, I learned firsthand what it is like to have asthma. I was so healthy when I retired here. I walked every day. I loved working in my garden. Now with the high ozone, high pollutants, and heat, I spent most of my days this summer shut up in my house with the air conditioner on and no longer walk or work in the garden. I take 2 different inhalers and medications to try to control my symptoms. I worry about those children with asthma who may be limiting their life, their childhood, because of this disease. The only reason I haven't moved away is that I don't feel I can leave the area and leave my 4 grandchildren in this pollution. I will stay and fight for clean air. The residents of Longmont stated in 2012 that we have a right to health and safety. I thank the legislature for the changes that they enacted that allow us to reestablish the rights of residents to protect themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. We have another resident from Longmont who also was part of our Longmont, Judith Blackburn.
Okay. I join Karen and Michael in thanking you for showing up today. This has been such a surprise for the 3 of us. We are the 3 remaining members of the board of directors for our nonprofit that did the petition drive. And we didn't expect that we would be called upon again to justify our initial petition drive and thrust to keep Longmont from being fracked, but here we are again. And we're very grateful to Joe and Ann Lee for bringing us out of our 3rd retirements to fight yet more for our right for some local control. I think this last legislature was very brave to put forth this new legislation. Right now, all of Colorado is going through a lot of choice-making, decision-making about the rules changes, the implications of this important legislation, and we're proud to be part of it. I hope that your good wishes for us will carry the day, and that when we come back for the next press conference, we can say, we did it. We're home free. We have made the good wishes of Longmont voters back in 2012 come true. Thank you.
Okay, and last but not least, is a very feisty, well-known resident of Longmont, Representative Jonathan Singer.
All right. Well, thank you guys very much. And when someone tells you to put your best foot forward, think twice. That's all I can recommend. And actually, while we're doing this, before I introduce myself, can we have the residents come up here? I want people to see this well, but I also want you to see the people that are responsible for making this lawsuit possible and the people that started this conversation back in 2012. I'm standing here because it wasn't the legislature that started this conversation. It was average citizens standing up, speaking truth to power, collecting signatures, and in a politically divided city, in the city of Longmont, it's evenly split between Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, we're able to pass something at the ballot 60-40. 60-40 in the same year, more votes than Barack Obama, more votes than Mitt Romney, more votes than what I got in 2012. The voters were unequivocally clear, and that is due to these folks that are standing in front of you today. So thank you guys for starting this conversation. We wouldn't be here without you, and this legislation wouldn't be here without you, and today's press conference wouldn't be at all possible. So I'm State Representative Jonathan Singer. I represent Longmont Line. You can stay up here. It's okay. Oh, the microphone has to be up here too.
Oh,
I
that's
see.
true.
I see how that goes. Here, Michael.
Joe needs to stand next to, I think, you.
I see.
Sorry for the back.
You wanted this on the
It's a good
mic.
side.
So I'm State Representative Jonathan Singer. I represent Niwot, Longmont Lines, and Allens Park at the state legislature, and I've been doing so since 2012, when the inception of the initiative to change Longmont City Charter to include the ban on fracking took place. And what I'm here today to talk to you about is really two things. The first one is, what was the legislative intent? Go back to Senate Bill 181 that flips this script on what it means for oil and gas in the state of Colorado. It no longer is a statewide preemption. The state does not take precedence over what local governments want to do when it comes to protecting our health and safety. That is so critical for people to understand. We don't explicitly talk about bans in one direction or another. And so when the citizens came forward, when the citizens stood up, when the citizens took the initiative to speak truth to state and local government, to say, you know what, we don't want to see fracking over our drinking water resource, over our reservoir, which is what's happened. When they spoke up, they were left without a paddle. Today, with Senate Bill 81, we've given them the paddle to go upstream and to bring this court case back to the district court and begin that conversation again. So the second thing that I'm here to talk about is to talk about it as a parent, as somebody who lives in the city of Longmont. When I moved to the city of Longmont, I didn't ever think about whether or not oil and gas was going to be in my backyard. But the reason that this is so important, and the reason that you've heard about it already, whether it's Karen and talking about her grandchildren or myself and my own children, we don't just look at the weather report anymore in the city of Longmont, we look at the air quality report. More and more science is coming out showing that we have ozone levels similar to that of downtown Los Angeles over Boulder Reservoir. Think about that for a second. That's not cars that are creating that. We're not seeing traffic levels the same as downtown Los Angeles over Boulder Reservoir. Where's that coming from? Well, it turns out when you do heavy industrial activities, polluted air and polluted water doesn't care about jurisdictional boundaries. What's an industrial zone? What's a city? What's a county? They travel where the air goes, they travel where the water goes, and they go into the lungs and the bodies of the residents in my communities. And so there is an opportunity here to set today to set a new precedent, to rewrite the script here in Colorado, to set a new way going forward that will take into account the fact that when you have ozone levels similar to that of downtown Los Angeles, the downstream and downwind effects of that are things like asthma. And the health costs and the life costs from things like asthma, we know are too high to pay. The science is clearer today than it ever has been that contributing ozone levels are as bad as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. We tell our kids not to smoke. Do we tell our kids not to go outside and play? Those are the questions I have to ask myself today. Those are the questions that no one should have to ask themselves. This court case means a lot in terms of what we're going to do in terms of policy, but it can mean even more in terms of protecting the health and safety of our next generation, our elders, and future generations to come. So thank you guys very much. I look forward to seeing where we can go with this. And I truly want to thank my residents, my constituents, for standing up and doing something that no one thought they ever could in a politically divided community, and making this not about politics, but about people.
Great.
And thank you, Jonathan, for being so supportive.
Yes, thank you.
And from higher places as well. You know, we need it from all levels.
Great. So questions?
Joe, are there other local initiatives like this one in Longmont that you think now could be revisited in light of this bill?
Yeah, so in conjunction with the city of Longmont case, there was also a case involving the city of Fort Collins and their ban. And so that could also be looked at.
That was a moratorium, though, right?
That was a moratorium, right? Right. So you can always revisit those cases to see if If they could bring that moratorium back, this also gives precedence to other cities and counties, other local governments, looking at their own bans and also looking at moratoriums as well.
The lawmakers behind this bill said time and time again throughout this process that this was not intended to be a ban. The COGCC has just released a comment saying that they don't believe that that is what SB 181 does. What do you say to that in light of this motion?
You know, I'm not going to actually speak to that. I'm going to speak to what the actual language of the law says. That's what the court of the courts are going to look at anyway. They're not going to look at what politicians said on the stump. They're going to look at what the law says. And what the law clearly says is that this section is not to be interpreted to prohibit local governments from adopting stricter or more protective measures. That's exactly what the law says. If the law says that, and it's void of any reference to prohibiting bans or what have you, then that's what the courts are going to go with, not what a politician said on the House floor or out in community, or even what the COGCC said, because they're not the legislator.
And may I add a little citizen/layperson comment to that? Duh, what's the COGCC going to say? I don't mean that personally to you, I'm just making a point.
I'm just telling you what they, that's what people are gonna say,
Sure.
and so you're saying that there's nothing in the law that says that you can't have a ban.
The
In fact-
industry also says fracking is perfectly safe.
Right. I said it in my motion. I said it very clearly in my motion what the case law is. The Supreme Court has said that we will not read into the law what wasn't already put there by the legislature. So I really don't care what the oil and gas industry says or what COGCC says. I care what the law says, and that's exactly what the court is going to look at too.
Has Colorado Rising or our Longmont had any conversation with Longmont city officials or Fort Collins city officials about where they stand on trying to reinstate these measures?
Yes, so I did speak with the city attorney for City of Longmont. We did not speak with Fort Collins because this doesn't pertain to Fort Collins, and they do not take a position on this matter one way or the other.
Does this set precedent? Because obviously this was a ballot initiative, this was a petition that took signatures to get this ban in place. Would this set precedent to allow potentially other cities and counties to just pass a ban, or would it have to go through this same petition process?
So it depends on what their city charter requires, but by and large, if it's either brought forward by a city council, brought forward by county commissioners, or through voter-led ballot process, it can always be brought. That's the whole point, is that they can do it. This doesn't mean that automatically cities and counties, once we're successful here, that they could just ban it all across the board. They're going to have to take their own steps through their own processes to do it.
Yeah, question as to process and timing. This is a motion to lift the underlying court injunction that was entered on May 2nd, 2016 by the Colorado Supreme Court, or essentially they upheld that injunction. And so now you're filing a motion inside of that case to have that injunction lifted, is that right?
That's right.
Okay, now as far as the timing is concerned, I mean, rules and regs are being developed right now by the COGCC and the CDPHE to put Senate Bill 181 into effect. It's been said it's going to take months, possibly even a year to do that. Is it possible that this motion is premature?
No, it's not, because of what rules and regulations are subservient to the law. And the law says what it says, that local governments are not prohibited from adopting stricter or more protective measures. And so, like I said, I don't care what the COGCC adopts in terms of its own law or in terms of its own regulations. We're going off of what the law says. And because the law has now changed and Article 16 is no longer in operational conflict with the law, that the injunction should be lifted. But that's a really good question, because a lot of people are going to say, well, let's turn to the COGCC and see what they do. And my response is, I really don't care what they do. The law is the law, and they have to operate within those guidelines as well.
Isn't it possible that a ban or a 5-year moratorium, which is what was in effect in Fort Collins, the court ruled that was effectively a ban, could still be found to be in conflict, in that it's kind of an all or nothing operation, right? I mean, we've never really tested the theories to the extent to which local governments can regulate oil and gas drilling, but the court has said you may not stop it altogether.
So this case is precedent setting, because it's going to raise those questions. I'm sure that the oil and gas industry is going to say that that this Article 16 is still in operational conflict. But let them say that, because the law says what it says. It is clearly and expressly stated by Senate Bill 181 that local governments can adopt stricter and more protective measures or regulations over the oil and gas industry. Like to see them try to get around that express language. They're not going to be able to do it.
What are the stakes if the courts reject this motion?
Well, if the state rejects the motion, then we move forward to the appellate courts. We're not going to stop because one court says that they might disagree with it. I mean, we're going to take this case as far up the chain of command as we need to.
What if the Supreme Court says that this isn't necessary and reasonable?
Well, then I guess we can address it when we get to that point. But at this point, we just have the case in front of the district court. Yeah.
So when you said that other cities were looking at moratoriums, could you be a bit more specific about that?
Well, there's right now currently 8 or 9, I think, local governments that have already adopted some type of moratoria on fracking, or at least on permits. Adams County is one of them. Erie, I think we have. Is it Timnath?
Timnath, Berthold,
Berthoud,
Broomfield,
yeah.
Boulder.
Right. We're talking about local governments that reside in counties that are very frack friendly, right? Timnath and Berthoud, as well as Meade, I believe, has also adopted some type of moratorium. So it's a number of cities, and I think that even more are probably looking at some type of moratorium.
And moratorium and ban are different, though. Is precedent setting in your eyes in terms of going much further? A ban is completely, we're not going to have this within city limits, versus not until SB 181 sorted out.
That's right. And so, a municipal charter is basically the constitution of a municipality, right? And so that's what Article 16 resides in. It's a municipal charter. So it does say ban. And so that's what makes it precedent setting, is that it does ban fracking activities within the city limits of Longmont. And so moratoria are different because it could just be for a certain period of time, or it could be for an extensive period of time. But yeah, you're right. Bans and moratoria are different.
Which operators are drilling or fracking in Longmont?
So one of the principal plaintiffs in this case is Top Operating Company. They're one of the drillers, and then of course Colorado Oil and Gas Association filed on behalf of their members in this case, who's currently trying to operate within the city of Longmont. Do you guys know who they are?
Yeah,
Cub Creek.
And Extraction has some plans out by Sandstone Park and
Yeah.
on the south.
I would invite you to drive down Highway 66 just west of I-25 over by McIntosh Lake. I was there 2 days ago, and there's a huge fracking rig that is being set up right outside of the McIntosh, ready to drill. And how devastating would that be if in the midst of these industrialized activities that they contaminate that water source?
It's a Union Reservoir.
Or it's Union Reservoir,
It's Union,
okay.
not McIntosh.
And would this ban apply to that? Because is that within city limits? Because I know Longmont's
Ye-
spent
ye-
money
yes,
to get them
Union.
outside, to get them underground.
Union is, yeah.
City.
It is, so this would
Correct.
impact that.
It would.
Well, the drilling, they're proposing to drill under Union Reservoir, which is potentially a water source for us, which is potentially serious problems with migration of fracking fluids and et cetera. all kinds of
Spills.
Spills, of course, surface.
It really was an interesting trip because I drove past there, saw the big fracking rig, and maybe just a stone's throw away, there was a bald eagle nest sitting on top of I think it was like a tornado siren, right? Right by this fracking rig, right? And so we have wildlife issues that we're dealing with. We also have environmental issues that we're dealing with this fracking rig just sitting there. And so that's what we're looking to stop. We're looking to stop the adverse effects that will occur as a result of these
But
activities.
look at the bright side. We have a siren so that when we have explosions and spills, we'll all be warned.
What are the next steps in terms of your timeline? I mean, I know it has to be reviewed, but when are you expecting that?
Okay, that's a really good question. Procedurally, so now that we have the motion to reopen the case, the parties in the case have an option of either objecting to the motion and filing their responses to that motion, or not objecting at all. We do have at least one, well, we have two parties that have indicated that they're not either taking a position or they don't object at all. Food and Water Watch has indicated to me that they do not object to this motion at all, so they won't be filing a motion in opposition. We have City of Longmont, who is taking no position whatsoever, so we don't anticipate that they'll be filing any motion in opposition. I did receive this morning an email from Top Operating Company from their attorney indicating that they will object, so we anticipate that a motion will be filed there. Have not heard from COGA, have not heard from the state of Colorado or the Attorney General's office. And I did speak with Sierra Club this morning, but they were gonna give me a call back and tell me what their position was. So once that's filed, okay, just a follow-up with you. So once they file their response to our motion, then we get to file our reply, and then likely there will be oral arguments in front of the district court on that motion to reopen the case. If the court rules in our favor to reopen the case, then we move to the next step, which is the motion to lift the injunction. But I imagine that once we have worked through the motion to reopen the case, then it's going to be a pretty quick step from there on.
Most wells are fracked, but it is physically possible to drill a well without fracking. Most of what you've talked about today is drilling rather than fracking. Is your objection, is your intent to just stop drilling in Longmont by stopping fracking? Or would you be willing to see wells continue to drill if they weren't fracked?
So that's up to the amendment, right? I mean, we're not here to argue one way or the other what we want to see and what we don't want to see. What the amendment clearly states is that it bans hydraulic fracturing within the city limits and also the storage and disposal of fluids as a result of hydraulic fracturing. So that's what the ban states.
So your target isn't drilling, it's hydraulic fracturing.
That's the ban.
That's the ban.
That describes the ban.
There's no drilling without fracking in Colorado.
Exactly, and that,
Nobody does that anymore.
Not on the front.
not even in Texas.
Thank you, Joe.
Anything else? Anybody else? Oh, another question.
Okay, sorry, I know that this is the second time I've asked a question.
That's all right. Joe asks usually about 15 questions. He's been pretty quiet.
I want to get you privately. It's
Yeah.
Anyway, so why is it that companies still continue to frack even though it's been proven time and time again by scientific studies that it's harmful to the environment and to residents?
Yeah.
You should
And
ask
the
money.
laws protect the money.
It's all about the cash, right? I mean, they make money off of this stuff. And not only that, but many of them are upside down and they have debts to pay. So they continue to frack and regardless of health, safety, and welfare. I'll tell you that now that I'm no longer a legislator and I'm representing clients in front of the COGCC, I'll tell you that the attorneys for the operators, they act like Senate Bill 181 never exists at all. They act like this thing isn't in effect. In fact, they make arguments that 181 doesn't apply in this case. And it really is astounding to me that they think so little of health, safety, and welfare and think so little about what the legislature did this past legislative session that they literally make an argument that 181 doesn't apply. And I just sit there. If I had any hair, I would lose it, right? Based off of their arguments. Because I really am astounded at times that they're making such arguments.
So to put it in your teen language, what we're doing is, hello,
Right?
181, to such parties as conveniently ignore, suppress, or circumvent the law. 181. It has now become the law.
I'm just curious if this is the best pathway for this. It can be done through litigation, which is the choice that you guys are making here today. But couldn't also just Longmont pass another ban? I mean, they could change some elements of it and run it up the tree again, couldn't they?
Let me speak to that real quick.
Okay.
It was one hell of a job to run an initiative, get the signatures, get the vote out at 60% in a bipartisan way. To do that, we devoted a year of our lives. I'm just saying, no, I don't want to do that again.
It's already on the books.
It's time we
That's
do
the
the legal
point.
challenge and we clarify that 181, basically, as far as I'm concerned, we citizens, it lifts health and safety above all else.
Right, but Top has already said they're going to file a protest.
So what?
Code is clearly going to
Fine.
file one. I mean,
I don't know if COGA is. They never responded. I imagine that they
News
will.
conference right after yours,
Sure.
is what they told us.
So, what was that?
They're supposed to have a news conference.
I'll bring my banjo.
So here's the thing: is that the law already exists. The charter amendment exists. The Supreme Court decision did not wipe it out of the books, and neither did the trial court's decision. It stays there. A voter-approved initiative can only be removed by the voters, and so because it exists and there's an injunction on it, the most natural thing to do is just to lift the injunction because it's no longer an operational conflict.
I think just to bring it back to this thing, I think it's a really important question, and Michael put it really well too. Let's not forget that 25,000 voters, 60% of the electorate, voted for something. I mean, if that doesn't mean something, then we need to ask ourselves the fundamental question: what is our democracy really there for? Could we go back to city council and talk to city council? Absolutely, we could, but that's 7 people, not 25,000 people.
And that's also and they're temporal. In other words, 3 years from now, there'll be a whole new council. We need to protect health and safety on a more permanent basis for our kids and grandkids, not subject to the whims of a given council or how it swings one way or the other.
All right, anything else? Okay, cool. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you for being here.